total restriction of flight operations in the country already activated, the International Air Transport Association says the aviation industry is likely to lose more than 160 billion naira in revenue and additional 22,000 jobs. This is not a good omen, but that has been the trend of global economic activities since the cure of coronavirus is yet to be confirmed. Although domestic flights are still operational, but will local flight operations be able to sustain the trajectory growth of an industry which contributed more than 198 billion naira to the country's gross domestic product in 2019? The question now is, what does the future hold for the aviation industry in Nigeria? This and more on Panorama from the Lagos Network Center. I am Hingino John Adams. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for being there. Now, 4 new cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed in Nigeria. This is according to the Nigerian Center for Disease Control. 3 of the cases are in Lagos, while 1 is in the FCT. 2 of the cases are returning travelers. This now brings the total number of confirmed cases to 40, out of which 37 are active, 2 have been discharged, and 1 death. The head of service of the Federation, Dr. Folashade Eson, has directed all non-essential public servants on grade level 12 and below to stay and work from home with effect from today, 24th March 2020, until further notice. All other categories of officers who will be at work are strongly advised to limit the number of visitors they receive to the barest minimum to reduce physical contact as much as possible. Jalal Ahmed Arabi of the State House has now been redeployed to the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management. Tijani Idris Umar, formerly with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management, has been moved to State House, while the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Transportation, Sabiu Zakari, has been redeployed to the Ministry of Defense. The circular conveying the redeployment was signed by the head of the Civil Service of the Federation, Dr. Folashade Eson. The circular stated that the deployment takes immediate effect and handing and taking over processes should be completed on or before 5th of April 2020. The most senior director in the Ministry of Transportation will oversee the affairs of the Office of the Permanent Secretary pending the appointment or posting of a substantive one. The Controller General of Immigration Service, Mohammed Babandede, has directed the processing of passport and e-registration be suspended with effect from Tuesday 23rd March to 23rd April 2020, in line with government's directive on restriction of international flights following a rise in COVID-19 cases in the country. A statement by the Service Public Relations Officer DCI Sunday James, however, indicates that the service will take advantage of this period to process all pending passport cases, and the public will be informed when they are ready for collection. President Muhammadu Buhari has approved full closure of the land borders to human traffic for 4 weeks, as well as the suspension of Federal Executive Council meeting indefinitely. Secretary to the Government of the Federation and Chairman, Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Boss Mustafa, announced these and other additional measures to contain COVID-19 at a media briefing in Abuja. Mitaire Ipen reports.
Trying times for the nation and the world, and Nigeria is taking more measures to contain the coronavirus pandemic, even with 1 death recorded. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 is saying these drastic measures are inevitable. Already, 42 out of 54 African countries have recorded COVID-19 cases, with 48 deaths so far in the continent.
If and when the need arises, Mr. President has approved that any national assets that are required for use in the response to COVID-19 shall be mobilized and deployed. Federal government is at the highest level engaging with state governors in order to ensure a collaborative and effective response to COVID-19 pandemic. All Abuja and Lagos residents are strongly advised to stay at home, avoid mass congregation of any kind, as well as non-essential outings.
The strategy of government, the task force says, is to focus on testing, detection and containment of COVID-19 through contact tracing to prevent community spread. This is in addition to provision of more isolation centers.
There will be one more in Lagos, making 6. But we are able to activate one test site in Maiduguri, Ibadan, Abakaliki, and they were expecting a donor who was going to give us another machine which we want to deploy in Kano.
Minister of Aviation Hadi Sirika clarified that the exemption of essential services in the ban of international flight operations must be backed by approval.
Humanitarian and medical relief flights that will have to have express approval before they land into the country.
To protect federal civil and public servants, the task force has directed the head of the civil service of the Federation to issue a circular with relevant directives without further delay. In Abuja, Mitaire Ikwen, NTA News.
We're not done with COVID-19 yet. As the federal government activates restriction of all international flight operations, key players are also counting their losses and implication for an industry that is fast growing. In this report, Michael Olale, who visited the Murtala Mohammed International Airport to examine the lockdown, reports that experts are already offering solutions.
In the real sense of it, this place used to be a beehive, but that is gradually becoming history as the coronavirus continues to force businesses to close shops. The coronavirus pandemic is coming at a time the aviation industry in Nigeria is showing glimpses of hope. For instance, the sector contributed 198.62 billion naira to the gross domestic product at the end of 2019, which represents 0.14%. If it eventually affects domestic operations, it will be difficult for most of the airlines to come back into business. So, like it's done in other places, it is not out of place for government to start thinking about some stimulus packages, some bailout packages to the airlines for this to keep them back, put them back into business.
We need to take the aviation industry as priority in the recovery process. And what are the processes left for the government? Financial incentives can be given, tax rebates, waivers on charges, guarantee on loans, even they can give corporate bonds.
With countries across the globe unveiling financial stimulants to put economic activities back on track, experts say the aviation industry should not be an exemption. In Lagos, Michael Olaleye, NT News.
Now joining me live in the studio to talk more on this is Captain Ado Sanusi. He's the Chief Executive Officer of one of the oldest airlines in Nigeria with diverse experience cutting across aeronautic sciences and airspace management. I would have loved to give you a handshake, but as a preventive measure against COVID-19, I'll just say you're welcome to our studio.
Thank you too.
All right, let's begin on this note. In specific terms, what do you think will be affected in the industry aside the suspension of international flight operations?
Well, aviation is global in nature, so the travel ban for the international flights will affect the domestic flights also. And of course, airlines are dependent on a lot of global services that the airlines get. Training, spare parts for the aircrafts, and all other necessary things that makes you run the airline. So it makes it very difficult if there is a ban internationally. And then, of course, the main thing, the passenger drop. We have about 40% last week passenger drop because of international travel that are coming in have stopped coming into the country. And that, of course, translates into loss of revenue. Now, if this continues and there is a lockdown, meaning there is a total ban on flights into the country or even within the country, that will affect definitely the airlines. It will make it very difficult for the struggling airlines because already they are struggling to come back and think that the business will be as usual because there's a lot of money, as IATA said, 170 billion. That is what they have projected, but we believe it's going to be more than that. Over 20 to 22,000 jobs are at stake. If we look at history, what Ebola did in 2014, it caused a lot of airlines in the country and within the region, West Africa region, to even go under completely. And that resulted into some of the takeovers by the government through AMCON of some of the airlines because of the Ebola crisis. Now with the COVID-19, which we don't even have the end in sight, it looks like the airlines are in for a very tough and challenging period, especially the Nigerian airlines, which are already struggling in the first instance. So our appeal, and of course what international community is doing, is to look at how they can provide assistance to these airlines after the coronavirus. So of course some countries are thinking of a bailout. But the problem with bailout also is that if it's not administered well, it goes to the wrong channel. So I say a more smart bailout would be good for the Nigerian airlines, and that is you look at what exactly the airlines suffer most. Is it on leases? Is it on payment of salary of staffs? Is it on already embarked on some maintenance facilities they're going to pay? So those are the targeted bailouts that should be given to the airlines in that instance. Because giving out money, just doling out money to the airlines, will not result into occupying seats in the aircraft after the coronavirus have gone.
Okay, now let's talk about domestic flights. How do we now make them their operations viable to retain jobs? Because you talked about loss of jobs. Yeah. You talked about training and other things. How do we now take care of this?
Well, first, the problem will be if the lockdown occurs, which I believe it might, then that means the airlines will not have revenue. That means the cost, the running cost, the fixed running cost will continue to incur. And then the payment of salaries will be very difficult for the airlines to pay, and that will result into the airlines to restructure, to send some people home. Definitely some people will lose their jobs. So in that, if the federal government can come in and say, okay, we are going to give you a bailout, but this bailout is not going to be used to procure new equipment or to invest in new equipment or any new programs, but also to look at exactly your costs, what actually suffered, how many aircrafts have you put on ground, what was your total revenue at that time, and what are you going to use with this money that we have given you? That is the only way when coronavirus is over. That's the only way now, with that kind of money, the airlines can now go back and get the workforce back into the airline. If not, then the airlines will have to reduce their capacity, which will result into massive lost jobs, and which will reduce into the shrinking of the aviation sector.
So now, after this problem has been contained, we know that businesses will begin to pick up.
Yeah.
You talked about one of the interventions, that's bailout. Mm-hmm. So apart from bailout, how can we revive the industry after this problem?
The industry already is struggling. So apart from giving a bailout, I think it's a good instance for us now to take a look at the aviation industry and reset and do a more deliberate policy in providing conducive environment for a growing aviation industry to prosper by introducing tax reliefs. Multiple taxation must be looked at, and also trying to protect the industry so that it can grow. It is already a delicate industry, and then the COVID-19 impact has already devastated the industry. And it's not only the airlines per se. We're looking at the...
Okay, Captain Ado Sanusi, I'll have to cut you here.
Yeah.
We'll now take a short break. We'll continue the discussion after that.
Slavery is an evil practice abolished all over the world over 200 years ago. But today, human traffickers are selling human beings as slaves in Africa. It is your responsibility to make sure that you and the people you know do not fall into slavery. Don't believe fake promises of jobs abroad.
People went to say Libya, Italy no use you when they carry me on top water. 4 days now they lock me for inside house, no food, no water. I nearly die. Now God, when me heaven and earth, now save me. If you get 1 naira for Nigeria, you get junior one, you say you no get papa, you no get mama, that make you come out. I beg go they do farm work. You better pass person when enter road.
Don't accept to travel to Europe through the Sahara Desert. You may be walking into slavery. Don't be a slave.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous, whether you do it for fun or for political gains. Real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Thanks for staying with us. This is Panorama coming to you live from the Lagos Network studio. Before we went on the break, I was speaking with Captain Ado Sanusi. Captain Ado Sanusi, before we went on the break, you were talking about how we can revive the industry locally.
Yes, I was trying to tell you it's not only the airline that will suffer. Also the ancillary companies that support the airline services, like the handling companies, the fueling companies, and also the air traffic system will suffer also, because we have seen now in the United States that so many air traffic controllers have contracted the COVID-19. And that affected the safety of the flights that are around the United States, and they have gone into their mode of making sure that all the staffs are well protected. So yes, after the COVID-19, we must look at a stimulus package or a bailout, because already, as I said, the airlines are struggling. So we have to look at a smart bailout. The former bailout we had in the industry actually went to a different sector rather than the aviation sector, and the aviation sector is still in the problems of what it has been having, the struggling of the financials and the rest, high interest rates and all that stuff. So the smart bailout will be a good thing to have, where government will target particular cost for the airlines and see that they help them out with either loan grants directly or a loan that is very soft, no interest rate, and with a very flexible payment period, which will make the airlines now go in and then recover from this COVID virus. But the impact of COVID virus in COVID-19, I mean, in the aviation industry will be with us for a long period of time. It will be with us for probably next 5 years.
So that means there has to be a long-term plan to revive the industry.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, now that Nigeria has closed all its international airports, what do we expect to see in the next 1 month?
Well, first, international airports are closed, so meaning there won't be international passengers or international airlines landing apart from what the federal government have given exemption. So I think what will eventually happen is that the local flights will have to be reduced drastically, and eventually there might be no flights at all. Because if everybody in Lagos and Abuja are being encouraged to stay home, then there won't be no flights because the flights are usually between Abuja, Lagos, and Port Harcourt.
All right, thank you, Captain Ado Sanusi, for coming on the program. It was nice talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Moving on now, talking World Tuberculosis Day. Poor knowledge on the causes, prevention, and treatment of tuberculosis is why the disease has remained a threat to public health. Annie Daniels reports that this factor was raised by a medical expert in Lagos while speaking on the prevalence of the ailment in Nigeria.
Tuberculosis, an airborne disease, has been in existence for centuries. The World Health Organization estimates that in 2018, nearly 10 million people died from the disease globally. In Nigeria, about 450 tuberculosis cases are diagnosed annually, and despite availability of free treatment, the disease remains a global epidemic.
The best performance we have had in finding out these cases is that we have seen 120,000 last year. So over 300,000 are still missing. If we do not know who these people are, if we do not find them out, put them on treatment, they will be there spreading the infection in their communities, in their homes, or wherever they are.
A sizable percentage of Nigerians claimed ignorance of tuberculosis.
I don't know anything about it.
I don't know anything about tuberculosis. I just heard about TB.
And for those with little knowledge of the disease, isolating sufferers, they say, is the solution.
When you carry it, people will be avoiding you because I know that it's something that can transparent to another person.
One of my uncles died out of it around 1989. Yes, 1989. He was coughing and vomiting blood. After some days, he died.
Dr. Omujekwe lauds the national policy on tuberculosis, but points out that creating the much-needed awareness remains key to stamping out tuberculosis in Nigeria.
Every health worker, every stakeholder, whether in public sector or in private sector, has to be on the alert to identify cases of TB. And we don't even have to wait until they come, which is called passive case finding. We need to be active in looking out for them. We have to go out, educate the communities.
Prolonged fever, weight loss, and cough are among symptoms of tuberculosis. And with early detection and treatment, a sufferer can live a normal life again. In Lagos, Annie Daniels, NTA News.
Now to sports. Sports facilities locked down in Lagos as a preventive measure against the spread of COVID-19. Olumide Oguntola has this and more on sports.